What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to talk about Silent Hill 2's loop theory and why I guess it's no longer actually a theory. It seemingly has been confirmed, and honestly, I think this is really cool. That's kind of jumping to my opinion on it. I'll explain how they found out, what the kind of conversation is, but I think it's a really cool thing. I feel that it was, I don't want to say obvious, but there were definitely signs in Silent Hill 2 Remake. And, I'm not like this encyclopedia of Silent Hill lore and what. I mean, I do my best to try, at least with Silent Hill 2, to kind of know what I'm talking about. But even someone such as I'm playing the game, and even with Eddie and some of the characters that are no longer alive, let's say, that are all kind of all around. I spent a long time actually staring at one of them. I think it was around kind of Eddie's boss fight, and I was like, you know what? I can't unsee James in that. And that was before. I mean, yeah, as the days went on, as the weeks went on, there were so many conversations of just that alone. So many of the bodies in the game looked like James. And then you go into the puzzles, right? Where it's like, okay, they took out some of the puzzles. Some of the puzzles are still in the game. Some of them have been swapped out, but some of them look like they've already been solved or just were there, right? So it's like, okay, they're still kind of present, and it just very much felt like, and it's not a new thing. People, ever since the original 2001, right? People thought that, okay, this is some sort of looping thing where, even in the best of best endings, which I imagine is, when you leave, right? Even in that one, you're still trapped. It's still not an ideal situation for James, and people thought even back 20 plus years ago that he was in a time loop. And I guess if you don't want to follow it along, I haven't seen too many people being salty about it, but I guess if you wanted to not consider it canon, I guess you don't really need to. It's just them saying it, and they're not the original people. But I take it as a thing, but I also kind of believed it in the first place, right? I felt that was just one of the almost hidden messages of the game. So this came from Dale Robinson on the Silent Hill Reddit, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, just this picture that's being shared around. Basically, if you count things within each photo, example, the open windows in photo 1 is number 6, then count that number across the writing on each one, you'll get a letter, and all the letters spell out to, you've been here for 2 years. So a couple examples. The first picture, you look at Y, there's 6 windows in it, so the 6th letter of so many people here, that is the Y, right? 2 is O, 2 bedposts, second letter of no one knows, 3 is U, 3 light spots, third letter of your best buddy, so on, so on. Eventually you get, you've been here for 2 decades. Now that, it seems kind of easy, when you see it, you say, oh, it's just counting things, right? It's counting things and taking that letter. And, it's actually, in a way, unoriginal, because we have had, I mean, I don't even think Dead Space was the first one, but the most notorious one, notorious in a good way, don't even know if I'm using that word in the right way, but, Dead Space is the one that pops out, right? When I don't want to spoil, I mean, it's from 2008, so hopefully people have played it, but you take the first letter, I believe, of every chapter, and it spells out the big twist at the end of Dead Space 1, or even Dead Space Remake. They kept that the same. So that was the first time I experienced something like that, just simply taking a letter, arranging, but it's a thing. It's a thing in so many different, it's a thing in detective stories and all sorts of stuff, right? It's not the most original, but for it to happen like this, though, right? You're looking for specific things. There's 6 windows in that picture, so you got to do the 6th letter of that phrase, and then 2, and then 3, so on, so on, so on, right? Pretty nuts, because there was a lot of people I was looking at those photos, and I was thinking, man, you can maybe get other stuff from the pictures and whatnot, maybe looping kind of ideas as well, or and also just kind of extended lore of what's going on, but to do that it takes a little bit of intelligence. You got to give it to this person. This to me is not them forcing something in that doesn't belong. Does that make sense? And I mean, look, we're in the culture war kind of stuff that happens all the time. I'm specifically talking about basically making Silent Hill 2 something it's not. And I just don't think that's what this is. I think because what we just talked about, there was an idea that this was the case since 2001. And when you play the game, there's a lot. You could play the original game, or I'm saying you could even play the remake, right? And there's so many signs that, something, even in some of the endings, right? He cuts Maria off. And it's okay, there's clearly signs that even he at some point recognizes, or at some points, in his journey, recognizes that he's done it before. And again, specifically the Eddie stuff is so, in my opinion, kind of in your face. You can find bodies just on the ground, even outside, in the town. The Eddie stuff, in the fridge and all their freezer and all that. I'm not saying it's obvious, but it's there to find if you want to find it. And I think it's a theory that makes sense, like within the lore of not just Silent Hill 2, but Silent Hill, like what Silent Hill does, right? I think it makes a lot of sense for a time loop thing to be a thing that can actually happen, right? So for this to happen, I feel like, honestly, I think it's cool. I think it's really cool. And I will say, though, to end this video, highly depressing, right? It's for it to be confirmed and, or if you want to consider it confirmed, whatever. But for it to be like that, it's like, man, you know, because I think there's some endings in that game that are better than others. In fact, I mean, again, for me, it's like Leave. Like what? I don't know, like the water ending and even like the Maria ending. Some of them are James not really coming to terms in the right way. That would maybe be actually that would be both, right? It's like, well, he could end himself in certain ways. That's not ideal. Or he can like take Maria to be like the substitute. That's not ideal. He's not really learning from what Silent Hill was like kind of testing him on, right? So, okay, those were kind of both failures. Leaving, and when you leave with Laura, like that's one of the only ones, if not the only one, that he actually kind of gets it. And then to be kind of depressing and be like, oh, well, I guess he walks through that gate and then he's back at the car and he's back doing the entire whole freaking thing again. Honestly, pretty freaking depressing because, you know, he's a troubled person. He's definitely made mistakes, but I think, does he not deserve to leave the town? Is that not a thing that he's earned at some point? I don't know. Maybe not. And I guess final thing, it works really well as a remake. It's kind of becoming more and more cliche because, you know, so many of these remakes have kind of like time things involved, right? When you think about Final Fantasy, and I mean, that was part of the lore already, and that's the thing. So many of these remakes can get away with doing something with time, right? Whether it's these time loops or just, you know, if you go Final Fantasy, like these kind of multiversal things, right? They can do those things. I mean, I guess because they can do them just in the first place, but also kind of the story and the lore allows it to. It's actually kind of ironic that a lot of these games do work, right? Because if you did this to a game that's not like Silent Hill, it probably wouldn't work. You'd have to explain it better. But for this, it's like, okay, that does make sense. Final Fantasy, that makes sense, right? Because of the life stream and all that stuff, right? Like it makes sense given the lore. It's just ironic so many of these games have used that theme or that like thing that you can do. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure, as always, you're subscribed to the channel, bell icon turned on. I hope to see you all on the next one.